negotiations on which the fate of Ukraine may depend. Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Washington for a visit. First, he will have a one-on-one meeting with Donald Trump, scheduled for 8:15 p.m. Kyiv time. Then at 10 p.m., a number of European leaders who followed Zelensky to Washington will join them. Among them are British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Donald Trump wrote on his social media the day before that Zelensky could end the war instantly if he wanted to. He added that Kyiv would not be able to regain Crimea and ruled out Ukraine joining NATO. The New York Times, citing one of the diplomats, writes that European allies fear a repeat of the White House scandal that occurred in February, when talks between Trump and Zelensky ended prematurely. Another concern is that Trump is playing into Putin's hands. Zelensky has already thanked the American people and Trump personally for their support and expressed hope that together with their allies, they will force Russia into a genuine peace. He reminded everyone of the mistakes of previous years and the security guarantees of 1994, the so-called Budapest Memorandum, which ultimately did not work. The day before, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky was on a visit to Brussels, where he met with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. He emphasized, "We will not give up any territory. The only basis for negotiations is the current front line."
I don't know what Putin and President Trump actually talked about. And President Trump told me many details and then he shared them with European leaders. And what President Trump said was a signal about security guarantees. For me, that's much more important than Putin's opinions because Putin won't provide any security guarantees. Security guarantees mean a strong army. Only Ukraine can provide that.
Ukraine must be able to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. There can be no restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces, whether it concerns cooperation with other countries or assistance from other countries. No restrictions for the Ukrainian armed forces. As I have often said, Ukraine must become a steel porcupine, indigestible for potential invaders.
So the main topic today, Washington welcomes guests from Europe. And today, Ukrainian President Zelensky, French President Macron, Finnish President Stubb, German Chancellor Merz, UK Prime Minister Starmer, Italian Prime Minister Meloni, as well as NATO Secretary General Rutte and European Commission President von der Leyen will be meeting with US President Donald Trump. All the streets around the White House were blocked off as early as yesterday, reports TSN's own correspondent in the US, Olha Koshilenko. So, to find out what to expect today regarding the US negotiating position after the meeting with Putin in Alaska, watch her report next.
While Putin was welcomed in Alaska with a red carpet and an air show featuring fighter jets, the guests from Europe were greeted with snow removal equipment and police cars blocking the roads. A little further down this street, at the intersection with Lafayette Park, the president of Ukraine traditionally stays at the Hay Adams Hotel, and already now it's impossible to get close to it. Until now, such a number of top-level world politicians have only been received at the White House during holidays, major summits, or receptions hosted by the President of the United States. But today there will be difficult and possibly decisive negotiations. According to the preliminary schedule, President of Ukraine Zelensky and the European leaders will hold consultations again in the morning local time and coordinate their plan of action. First, at around 8 p.m. Kyiv time, Volodymyr Zelensky will go to meet with Trump. Their conversation is scheduled to take place in the Oval Office, and an hour later, all the other leaders are expected to join them. 2 more hours have been allocated for the joint discussion. President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, and Special Representative Witkoff made it clear in the media the day before. Among other things, the discussion will concern a possible exchange of territories. This is the veiled way they refer to the demand for Ukraine to give up the territories occupied by Russia. The President of the United States reposted the following post from another user on his Truth Social page: Ukraine should be willing to give up some of its territories to Russia. Otherwise, the longer the war goes on, the more land they will lose. Witkoff, responding to the question of how President Trump feels about Putin's demand to hand over the entire Donbas without a fight, answered as follows.
We were present in the room as mediators, and the President, as a mediator, was looking for ways to resolve this crisis. He understands that it is up to the Ukrainians themselves to decide how they might exchange territories, how they might make a deal with the Russians regarding various territories. But that is exactly why Zelensky and the Europeans are coming to the White House on Monday, to make these decisions on their own.
Vitkov boasted on Fox News about so-called Russian concessions for the sake of a peace agreement. For example, Putin promised at the legislative level to forbid himself from attacking Ukraine and Europe. The fact that he will not seize all of Ukraine was called a victory by the US president's special representative. Although the reality is already clear, for 3.5 years, the Russian army has failed to accomplish this task. Another shift in the US negotiating position. After the talks in Alaska, an immediate ceasefire by Russia is no longer a precondition for further agreements. Secretary of State Rubio explained the president wants a comprehensive agreement right away because he claims it better guarantees peace. What security guarantees Ukraine will receive will also only be discussed at the meeting on Monday, Rubio promised. And none of the American participants in the negotiations explained what real concessions Russia is expected to make.
Both sides will have to make concessions. So, of course, we asked for concessions. But what good would it do if I went on a TV show and told you we wagged our finger at Putin and told him you must do this and you must do that? That would only complicate things and reduce the likelihood that they would agree. So these negotiations, no matter how much some might want to see them broadcast live as pay-per-view debates, work best when they are conducted privately in the context of serious talks, after which people have to go back and answer to their constituents. That's why even authoritarian governments have their own constituents to whom they must answer.
It's hard to predict how Donald Trump will behave this time. His previous conversation with Zelensky here at the White House on February 28th was scandalous and ended with the Ukrainian president leaving the talks early. After that, however, Trump and Zelensky did have several quite constructive contacts. The current American leader is still under the impression of his meeting with Putin and is irritated by the world press, which did not praise their talks in Alaska as highly as Trump would have liked. So much today will depend on whether the Europeans can present a united front to reshape the mood of the President of the United States. Reporting from Washington, United States, Olha Koshilenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN, 1+1, Marathon, United News.
Donald Trump's team wants Zelensky to wear a suit to the meeting in the Oval Office. Axios has learned from two of its sources that the White House asked Ukrainian officials what the president would be wearing. They recalled how Volodymyr Zelensky's attire became an issue during the February meeting with Trump in Washington. At that time, the American president did not like Zelensky's military-style outfit, and he even sarcastically remarked that Zelensky seemed to have really dressed up. Some American officials believe that it was precisely his appearance that, to some extent, caused the diplomatic fiasco. That is why they are now convinced that wearing a suit would be a good sign of peace. It is preliminarily known that the president of Ukraine will be at the White House in the same black jacket that he first wore since 2022 at the Vatican and at the NATO summit in the Netherlands in June. It's not a full suit yet, but it already resembles a business style. In Washington, they say that Trump reacted positively to this. One of the officials even told journalists, and I quote, "Zelensky was dressed like someone who belongs in NATO, so they had a good conversation."